This is a 100 milliliter fiberglass repair kit. I was sent this to review for free. If you wanted to purchase it, it would cost you about $9. So inside we have a little piece of sandpaper to rough up the surface. We have, looks like, 2 little disposable gloves. We have 2 different containers. It looks like 50 milliliters each of a 2-part, I would guess, kind of an epoxy type resin. And they have a single pusher here. So you use the pusher on one side and then you move it over to the other side. We have some mixing sticks, a tiny little silicone mixing vessel or pouring vessel, and kind of a smoothing thing here. Now the only instructions are on the back here, and they're not so much instructions as just all of the specifications. So the instructions are right here. Unlock the glue cap, squeeze out A and B simultaneously in the mixing cup, stir with a mixing stick for 30 seconds till it's fully mixed, start repairing, applying. The operational time is about 20 minutes. Let stand for 24 hours. The cockpit of my Sunfish here has a crack right in there, and if water gets in here, I think that is allowing it to soak into the inner hole. And so I am going to grind and sand this crack out and then cover that with this fiberglass repair material. If I'm happy with how it works, I might do the same thing to these side edges here, because I'm sure water is getting into the inner hole. Alright, we have to let that dry, and then we can mix up our epoxy resin. So I cleaned that off with isopropyl alcohol. It's been drying out here in the sun for about 2 hours, so I'm pretty sure that guy is dry and ready to put the epoxy over the top of it. Alright, so each of these packs actually has 2 super thin disposable gloves. They're not the highest quality gloves. This one kind of ripped. I'm not super happy with how close those are together, but we will seal it and hope it stays sealed again. Alright, we have to mix this for 30 seconds, and then we have approximately 20 minutes of working time, it says. Alright, it is very runny. I'd say definitely gel coat thickness. You won't be able to apply this on a vertical surface easily. So I probably mixed up about twice what I needed to use here. If this is any indication, it solidified to a very hard setting here. You can see I'm really not able to cut into it, so shore hardness is pretty decent on this guy. There I made a little scratch with a little extra force, but it seems to have set up pretty well. Flexible mixing bowl is pretty nice for getting the majority of it out pretty easily. So 45 seconds of picking with my fingernails. I got most of the little tiny pieces out of here, but there's still a few things left, so I might have to clean that up a little more before I mix more epoxy resin in it. Alright, so that's set up pretty well there. I have a little water on it from just water getting in from rain, but the actual epoxy here is pretty solid. Alright, so this is my Sunfish hull, and on the exterior there's 2 major spots. So this guy here looks like it's been repaired somewhat well, sorta. Now this guy over here, there's definite cracks, and it looks like kind of a filler was put over the top without cloth. This guy at least has fiberglass cloth there. There might be some cloth underneath this, and it kind of wraps around. There's a big patch of cloth there, so it's not in great shape all in all. I'm going to grind a bit of this down and take a look at what's under there. The goal here is going to be to patch this guy up. Alright, so this first repair, I ground around the edges a little. It was pretty good. This guy looks fine. This guy had problems. Maybe it was a repair and then it broke again, or maybe it was just not done well enough. But down here, that part looks good, but there's kind of a crack in there and in here. And I'm not sure if this crack happened after that initial repair in the exact same spot, or if it just broke through again. But that's the area I'm going to be focusing on, because I think that's the leak area. Obviously, I'm not trying to get this back to stock. I'm just trying to get it to not leak and hold together well. So we're going to put a couple of layers of fiberglass cloth, some thin fiberglass cloth over here. Maybe 1-2 layers that's sized for the crack, and then a third layer that's bigger than the crack. And I'm just going to be using this 2-part epoxy resin to put this in. Alright, so I'm going to do 2 layers here. The first layer will be basically over the crack, right there. The second layer is larger, and that will do a second layer over the crack, and then have a single layer that blends out to the rest of the hole to kind of smooth things down. Hopefully providing enough strength while not making it too lumpy. We'll see how this goes. Alright, I've mixed up as much as I can mix up in this little silicone measuring bowl. And I'm stuffing it into the crack as much as I'm able to before I put this guy down on top of it. And I'm counting on the fiberglass here to kind of hold it in place and keep it from moving. And then I'm going to pour all the rest of it on top of the fiberglass. And I'm really going to try to soak it into all these fibers here. Now this stuff flows, so I'm expecting it to get messy and go down. And so I'm starting at the top point and then pushing it into the fibers. And maybe I should have put it underneath onto the boat, but I think the fiber weave is thick enough that it's going to seep through and kind of go under on its own. We'll hope. By pushing it up and down a lot, I'm hoping I'm getting the stuff underneath it. And then sliding all around to the edges and everything. Now it's not flowing as badly with the fiberglass cloth there. I think the fiberglass cloth is kind of wicking a little bit, but it's not super thin, but it does flow, and it might over time flow more. And I'm going to get the scraper tool here pretty soon. I'm just using my mixing stick, the tongue espresso style mixing stick first. Now for my second batch, I think I'm going to mix it in a bigger container to get more all at once. Because this is enough for a small crack repair, but I'm going to be covering a big area around this thing here. Alright, so I'm using this guy here to try to push the fiberglass around. I'm also, just kind of trying to get it smoothed out at the edges. And since I know I'm putting a bigger cloth over this one, I'm not too worried about going off to the sides a little bit, because I'm going to need some on this whole surface to stick the next layer down on top of. So because this is kind of a gel coat replacement, it's dyed white, which is sort of nice, I guess. It might make it look a little nicer. But really it's that fiberglass that's giving me the strength for this crack, as opposed to just like filling in little tiny cracks with pinholes. Alright, I'm going to go mix up a second batch and put the second layer on. Alright, for the second batch, I just put in everything that was left here. So maybe there was 35 milliliters left into a yogurt container. And so we have here a decent amount at least 3 times as much as I had before, which I think should be enough for this area. And if I have extra, I'm just going to cover over some of that ugliness with white stuff that'll hopefully smooth it out a little bit. Because I'm not really planning on painting this guy or anything afterwards. So any type of white covering that yellow and pinpricks is good. And they say it's a 20-minute working time, and to stir for 30 seconds. And I see it dripping down here a little bit, you know, so I might have to move things around, but we'll get to that later. Enough there. We're going to be putting in just a gel coatish type thing over here, mostly to fill in pinprick holes. Alright, we're out in the sun. This guy's plenty hot. And there's a trade-off between when you stop working it to try to get rid of blobs and stuff, and giving it enough time to flow to get rid of the blobs. And I think I've pretty much hit that point. Now I'm going to have some drips, you know, down here. That's what sandpaper's for. I'm going to sand that down and smooth everything out. I think the key thing here is most of my fiberglass is underneath the epoxy. There's a few places where, you know, I'm going to be sanding off the edges of the fiberglass, like this thing I have to pull off and cut off. And then this over here was just using up excess resin that I'd mixed up. I'm going to sand it smoother than it is now, but it'll strengthen that area a little bit, hopefully smooth it a little bit less water resistance. Not going to be perfect, obviously. You know, don't judge me by my repairs, judge me by how bad it was before I started. Okay, this guy's had 36 hours to cure. We have wind and rain coming, so I really want to get this sanding done now before the rainstorm hits. You know, there's spots with drips here. I need to sand that down. The edges where the ends of the fiberglass are sticking out are kind of higher, and so I'm going to, you know, sand more in this region than the center region. Feels nice and hard, feels very rigid, very smooth here. I might get a roller out and paint another layer of the epoxy over everything after I'm done sanding, and it might smooth things out pretty nicely. So let's do a little sanding here. Alright, a brand new piece of sandpaper on there, and it cut through that pretty darn well. So I have like all the edges pretty smooth here. You know, there's, you know, you can feel where it goes up and down. Obviously there's a height difference, but it's kind of a smooth transition there. I knocked down all the little drips. And so I'm pretty happy with the overall surface finish here. It's not, you know, gel coat smooth right now, but I think if I make another batch up and just have a roller and roll it on like paint, I think that will do a whole bunch to you know, fill in any little gaps. Like you can still see the fiberglass weave here, for example, where it's not all the way, you know, a lot of dust here too, where it's not covering the weave yet. So I think I need another kind of epoxy only layer on top to get things pretty smooth. And when I do that, it'll definitely be better than it was before. You know, this guy's definitely watertight here now, so that's good. And I'm hoping the smoothness here will be better than I had before with just kind of the whoever whoever did it before me, throwing some fiberglass patches on and didn't really sand it down and cover it very well. So all in all, I'm pretty impressed with the ease of use of this little, syringe style epoxy system. And the epoxy is working just like other epoxy I've used. The only real difference here is it's dyed white as opposed to kind of a clear epoxy. So on the plus side, with the rain coming in, normally I'd have to wash that down, and I think it's going to be taken care of for me. So despite the light rain and all the wind, there's still a lot of dust on this guy, and I need to get that dust off before I put another layer of gel coat as paint over it to smooth things out. Then we're going to use regular water without soap to get most of the soap off before it gets dried on. So next up, I'm using IPA, isopropyl alcohol, also known as rubbing alcohol, and I'm basically just coating it with IPA and then wiping stuff off. And this is going to get any, grease or solids that are on there. But the main reason I'm using IPA is that it dries quickly. So out here in the wind and the sun, that thing's going to be very dry very quickly. So it'll be ready to paint relatively quickly. If you don't have IPA, alright, we're going to be using this as a paint. So I have my cabinet roller, sacrificial, disposable, pretty much everything here. And we're going to mix this up in the paint tray. So the plan is this is going to fill in all of the fiberglass weave that's visible, smooth out gaps and dips, and hopefully make it where water will flow smoothly over the whole patch. Now, I don't know if this will be enough. I'm doing about half, so about 25 milliliters worth of the resin here. And this resin is colder than before because it was cold overnight. It's probably about 65 degrees out here, and so it is quite thick. And so I'm anticipating potentially having issues with it being very thick and not wanting to flow. On the other hand, the boat's out in the sun, and so the surface of the boat should be warmed up pretty well now, and so it might warm up and start to flow once it hits the boat. But I am going to be running into some issues with the thickness of it with mixing potentially, so I'm doing a little more mixing than I might otherwise do because it feels like it's thicker and definitely is going to take more mixing. And the cure time might be a little bit longer, we'll see. So they say it's a 20-minute operating time at 25 centigrade, which is, like 77 Fahrenheit. So it's definitely cooler than that, and since it is cooler, we might get a longer operating time. It might take longer to cure, but I'm planning kind of, at least 24 hours here anyway, so it should be fine, hopefully. But, temperature is an issue potentially. So I am going to be losing a decent amount of this to my roller, essentially. So we'll see how this works. I might have to mix up a second batch real quick. So my priority is to get this side here, and if I have stuff left over from that guy, it's great. I've kind of already used it as a gel coat on this side. Yeah, and I'm already out, so I'm going back to mix my other half of the syringe. Alright, so the experience of using this with a foam roller as paint is different from using it, with a putty knife type thing and kind of filling in bigger holes and using it with epoxy resin. It rolls on pretty well. I don't feel like I got a thick enough coat to really fill in like gaps and little areas. Maybe I could have sanded a little better right there. But I'm pretty happy with this. It looks like it's filling in the weave of the fiberglass cloth. It did a little smoothing at the edges here. I mean, obviously this patch is stuck up from the original boat, and you saw what it looked like before I got started, and now at least it's waterproof, and I think it's going to be a little smoother, definitely more stable and solid than what it was when I started with. And so, you know, this is not a attempt to get this back to showroom status. This is very much a attempt to get it into a working state, and I think it's going to work pretty well for that. Here's a view of the kind of side edge that was the top from the previous view. Alright, so I've used both of the tubes of epoxy here. Pretty happy with this. I believe it's just epoxy resin, kind of like you'd find it, you know, standard double tube epoxy resin, but there's some kind of, I would say, kind of a white dye in one half of it, so it's a very white coat when you're done with it. I didn't really use their sanding pads too much. I got out my big sander for the big thing, but it's useful to have. The gloves were a little bit thin and lightweight. You know, I much prefer, you know, nitrile gloves. This guy was useful if you're mixing little bits, but when I started going for the big patches, I got out yogurt containers and just, you know, mixed in the paint tray, that type of thing. It was actually, you know, 100 milliliters doesn't sound like a lot, but with both of those guys, it did a reasonably sized patch, you know, a square foot patch type of thing. So if you have a small bit of, you know, cracks in your gel coat or something, you can paint over it with this guy. And if you provide your own fiberglass cloth, you can, you know, do some reasonable repair work with it. So I feel like, you know, the value provided here is pretty good. Alright, so this guy is cured for a day. So I painted on the epoxy, and you can kind of see, you know what you mean, roller marks here. So it was thick enough that it didn't really flow a whole bunch after I put it down. You can see kind of a texture, almost an orange peel texture in some places. Now in other places it's very smooth. So it's not perfect, and that's more due to my lack of experience with fiberglass and epoxying, I think, than do the materials. So, you know, the epoxy itself seems to be fully hardened and cured. There's certain places where it's very smooth, so it kind of, you know, flowed out and did things. So I think I'm going to sand it with a really light sandpaper just to kind of smooth things out a bit, and then call it good and put it in the water.